If you've been wondering whether or not we should set up a formal agreement with the illustrator for our beautiful children's book and how to put one together, then this video is for you. Hi there, I'm Eevi, an award-winning children's author and ghostwriter over on eevijones.com and the creator of Children's Book University. I create videos specifically for children's authors, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss my weekly videos. Having our story illustrated is such an exciting and also important step. So before working with an illustrator, we will want to have a contract in place before we start working together. And that's really to protect either side and to prevent any legal disputes or financial issues later on. I've been using an illustrator agreement for every single one of my books I have created over the years, whether that was for my own or for my ghostwritten books. And so in this video, we are going to look at when such an agreement might be optional and when we should definitely be setting up our very own illustrator agreement. 2, how to set up such an agreement. 3, the 11 elements we want to make sure to include in our agreement. And 4, what tools we can use to make our agreement truly legally binding. Now, before jumping in, it's important to remind you that I am not a lawyer. So if you should have any questions or are uncertain about any of these parts, please be sure to have a lawyer review your agreement form to ensure all expectations have been laid out and that you're protected from a legal standpoint. Now, when exactly should we as children's authors set up our very own illustrator agreement, and in what instances would we not have to do so? If we are using a freelancer platform like Upwork or freelancer.com, we often don't have to worry about a contract because those platforms usually take care of all of these legal elements for us. To read up on these outsourcing platforms' terms, we can simply scroll all the way down to the bottom of their homepage and then find their terms and conditions there. That being said, before deciding to work together, I personally always ask my illustrators to sign my own agreement, even if I hire them through such a freelancer website. Now, if we are hiring our illustrator directly without such a freelancer platform, that's when we definitely want to set up a binding agreement beforehand without an exception. So if, for example, we find an illustrator over on Instagram, that's when we want to definitely set up our own agreement. If you have any questions on how we can find an illustrator and what to pay attention to when working with an illustrator, I have added 2 links to 2 videos on just that in the description below. So anything that could be disputed later on, we will want to make sure to put in our agreement. The more detailed it is, the better. Most illustrator agreements have 11 main parts. So let's take a look at what we should include to make sure we don't forget anything in our illustrator agreement. First, we will want to, of course, include our names, our own name and that of the illustrator. Here, I also like to include the illustrator's email address. That way, it's always readily available and I don't have to dig through my inbox every time I need it. Second, I include all the specifications pertaining to my requested illustrations. That would include 1, the number of illustrations I need, and 2, the size I would like my illustrations to be in. Here it's really important to be as specific as possible, even though we will also mention this in our illustrator brief we should be putting together for our illustrator later on. It's important to have it in our agreement already listed as well. So when I'm listing the size I would like my illustrations to be in, I usually include 3 things. 1, the size in terms of inches. 2, the size in terms of pixels, and 3, my desired resolution. And for children's books, that's usually 300 dpi or dots per inch. And that is my first ninja tip right here. Sharing the DPI with our illustrator is really important because the pixel size will actually change with the DPI. So the greater our desired dots per inch, the bigger our illustrations. Now, oftentimes aspiring children's authors think that the bigger the DPI, the better. But I personally always recommend to go with 300 DPI because that will provide us with a crisp resolution while still keeping each file size manageable. Because something many don't realize is that especially for ebooks, the greater the overall file size in the end, the greater the delivery cost for our ebook to people's e-reader, which of course will impact our royalty rate as authors, right? Now, if you have any questions regarding the size of your illustrations or how to figure out the pixels, I went ahead and added added links to 2 separate videos of mine in the description below. One helps us figure out what book size would be best for our children's book, and the second one is a link to my illustration template generator tool where we can actually download an illustration template for our Illustrator that shares both the size in pixels and also in inches and also in centimeters depending on where you live geographically, and it's absolutely free. And if you should need any help with your Illustrator brief that I briefly mentioned here, I've added a link to a separate video on that in the description below for that as well. Now, as you may have noticed here, we as authors should already know what size we want our children's book to be in, even before we are hiring our illustrator. And that's my second ninja tip right here, and one of the biggest ones I can give when it comes to having our beautiful children's story illustrated. I am such a big advocate of already knowing what exactly we are looking to receive from an illustrator even before we reach out to any potential artists. The third element we will want to include in our illustrator agreement and that we do not want to miss is the number of revisions, meaning how many times we as authors can request an illustration to be revised. When drafting an agreement between two parties, I believe it's really important to look out for both parties, to be fair to both parties. And so this element right here is meant to do just that. I personally like to keep it here at 3 revisions per illustration. Keeping it at 3 revisions will provide authors with an opportunity to request a number of tweaks, while at the same time keeping it manageable for the illustrator, where they know that it's not an unlimited amount of requests that can be made. Because I have found that if an author has an unlimited number of revisions, they tend to keep coming back and changing their mind, which doesn't really serve anyone, right? Because that often results in an unnecessarily long and indecisive back and forth, which then often makes the illustration process take much longer than it should. And this right here really is why many illustrators often ghost their clients, because they are being asked to revise each illustration so many times. And so this right here is yet another great reason why creating a detailed illustrator brief is so important, because that way we really won't need more than 3 revisions. Again, I will make sure to share the link to my illustrator brief video in the description below. The fourth element we will want to include in our illustrator agreement is how we want our illustration to be delivered. This consists of 3 important parts. 1, we will want to include what format we want our illustrations to be shared in. So, for example, do we want them as a JPEG file or a PNG file, or the original file format the illustrator created the illustrations in, which often includes all the different layers of the image. Or perhaps we wish to receive each illustration in more than just one format. Either way, that's what we will want to include in our agreement. 2, we will want to include how we want the illustrator to share those files. Here it's important to remember that each illustration is fairly large, right? So sending them via email might not be the most effective way. So here I often include that I would like them to be shared via Dropbox or via Google Drive, for example. And 3, we will want to include the due date here, the final date by which all these files need to be submitted and transferred by. Here the date very much depends on the previous conversations we may have had already with our illustrator. This is a really important date that we will want to keep an eye on throughout the illustration process, so we can help our illustrator meet that deadline. The 5th element we will want to include in our illustrator agreement is another really important one, and that's about who is going to hold the rights of the completed illustrations. Now again, how we phrase this section right here will largely depend on the conversation that we've had with our illustrator beforehand. I personally usually request the complete and exclusive rights in the finished work. The 6th element we will want to include in our illustrator agreement is all about the payment of our illustrator. This consists mainly of 3 parts. The first part right here is all about the arrangement of the payment. In my book, How to Self-Publish a Children's Book, I recommend to split the payment into 3 equal milestone payments instead of paying either all up front or all at the end of the project. And this again is meant to protect both parties, right? Us authors as well as our illustrator. The way I personally like to set up my milestone payments here is to 1, pay the first payment after all the sketches have been created and approved by me, the author. 2, pay the second payment after all the colored illustrations have been created and approved by me. And 3, pay the third and final payment after the illustrator has provided me with all the final files in the format that I have requested in the illustrator agreement. Doing it this way protects both us, the authors, and also our illustrators. The second part of the section we will want to include is the amount of the commission, and this again will very much depend on the conversation we already had with our illustrator. So whatever we agreed upon is what we would want to list here. And the third part of the section here is to provide the illustrator with an opportunity to share how they would like to be paid, whether that's via PayPal or Payoneer or a direct wire transfer, for example, whatever it may be. The seventh element in our illustrator agreement should cover a number of different things. I call this section the other section. In my own illustrator agreement, this includes two parts. The first part covers everything cancellation related. Here I mentioned, for example, what would happen if the author terminates the agreement. For example, what would happen to the already made payments. And it also covers what would happen if the illustrator terminates the agreement. What would happen to the already made payments then? It would also cover who would own the artwork in the event of cancellation. So it's an important part to include. And the second part here has the illustrator guarantee that all work is original and that it will be specifically created for us, the author. The eighth element we will want to make sure to include in our illustrator agreement is a non-disclosure agreement, where the illustrator agrees that any and all proprietary and confidential information which is being shared with them shall remain confidential. So no matter what the illustrator is working on for us, this shouldn't be shared in any way. This often includes the sharing of our illustrations without our permission, and of course the sharing of our manuscript if that's something we provided our illustrator with. The ninth element I like to include in my illustrator agreements is something I personally find very important whenever I'm working with an illustrator, and that's all about communication. Having written and ghostwritten more than 60 children's books, I know that communication is truly everything. So in this section I include that the illustrator agrees to keep the author up to date with communication via email no less than once per week. Now this is completely optional, but I find this so helpful whenever I'm working with an illustrator. The 10th element we will want to make sure to include in our illustrator agreement is the applicable law under which our agreement should fall. So in case of a disagreement, which jurisdiction should interpret the terms of our agreement? Here we would want to include our own county, state, and country, right? Because that would be the jurisdiction we would want this to fall under, not our illustrators. And finally, the 11th element we will want to make sure to include in our illustrator agreement is the date in our own signature as well as the signature of our illustrator. These are the main 11 elements I always make sure to include in my illustrator agreements. Now there are many different ways we can set this agreement up and share it with our illustrator. For example, we can simply email it as a PDF file, which our illustrator then can sign and email back to us. Or we can set up a Google form where the illustrator will have to agree to each section. Or we can set up something more formal via something called an electronic signature service. There are many different services like this out there, like DocuSign or SignNow or Dropbox Sign. I personally like to use a service called DigiSigner, which I have been using for years. Using an electronic signature service such as DigiSigner has multiple advantages. One, all signatures we create with such a service are legally binding and secure and are recognized in court. Two, everything is done digitally and we won't have to print or scan anything. And three, everything is usually fully automated. So with DigiSigner, for example, once we have shared the link to our illustrator agreement with our illustrator and they have signed the document, it will be automatically sent to us so we can sign it as well. And once we have signed the agreement as well, a complete copy is sent to our illustrator's inbox and to our own inbox. I love this service and I always love sharing services with you that provide you with a free option. So at the making of this video, DigiSigner offers a completely free option that enables us to create 3 free documents per month, which is all we will need. As I already mentioned, I use DigiSigner for all my illustrator agreements and my ghostwriting agreements these days because it is so easy to set up and really easy to use. So let's take a look at how we can set up our illustrator agreement that way. The first thing we will want to do, no matter what method we are going to use, is to, of course, put the body of our illustrator agreement together. Here we can use Word, Google Doc, or whatever word editing software we prefer, and add the 11 elements we just talked about. Now here's my third ninja tip that really has helped me so much over these past few years with these agreements. If we do it right, we will only have to put together an Illustrator agreement once, no matter how many illustrators we may be commissioning later on. And here's how. Instead of pre-filling the form by including the name of our illustrator or the number of illustrations or the payment amount or any other variable that would change with each children's book, we can actually simply add blank lines here. And that way we will be able to use our Illustrator agreement over and over again. So once we have put our Illustrator agreement together, we will want to save it as a PDF file. Now, alternatively, instead of putting our own Illustrator agreement together like this, we can also simply use the PDF that is part of my Illustrator Survival Kit that also includes things like an Illustrator cheat sheet and how to reach out to potential illustrators. So in case you would like access to this PDF, I've added the link to my Illustrator Survival Kit in the description below. Now, once we have downloaded our created agreement as a PDF file, we can customize it directly in whatever electronic signature service we decide to go with. Since I'm using DigiSigner, I will go ahead and show you how to customize it directly in DigiSigner. Once you've signed up for your free DigiSigner account, you will be able to log in and you should see a dashboard that looks something like this. So the first thing we will want to do is upload our PDF that we have just created. So click on Upload Document. Once it is uploaded, we can go ahead and customize it. So click on it and it will open right up. There are essentially three different types of fields we will want to add right here. One field is the blue field right here that will later on be editable by the illustrator. And we will want to add the gray fields right here that adds all the information that will not be editable. And of course, we want to add our own fields that we then later on have to edit as the author. So let's go ahead and start with the non-editable information that we want to add to our agreement. So the first part right here would be the name, right? Our name that will not be changed. So we will want to go ahead and add our name using the gray fields right here, clicking on text and then add our name, because we are the client. Another piece of information that will not change for this particular agreement is the number of illustrations, right? So we want to add the number of illustrations right here by again adding a text field. So let's say we want 25 illustrations. So we want to add this right here. And then right here, we would add the pixel size and inch size for each illustration, the width and the height. Another thing that doesn't change is the number of revisions, right? So let's say we want to have 3 revisions per illustration. So we want to add this right here. And so we want to go through this document right here and add all the information that needs to be shared with the illustrator. So for example, the due date. We want to make sure we add the due date right here. And also, for example, the compensation, right? So fill in all the fields that will not be changeable later on for the illustrator or for myself. Another field that we already want to fill in are these deliverables, for example. So let's say I want the deliverables to be all layered source files. So I will want to go ahead and add a check mark here already. So I can go ahead and click on check mark and add that right here, so that the illustrator knows later on that this is what I request. And the same right here. If I would like to have my illustrations to be delivered to Dropbox, I will go ahead and add that right here as well. And then add my email here. hello@ and then .com to let the illustrator know what email to add to the Dropbox. Okay, so this is the first type of field. The second type of field are the fields that the illustrator will have to be able to fill in. So for those, we will use the blue field. So I click on the text field and click on this area right here, and this will create a editable field, blank field for the illustrator where they can later on come in and type in their own illustrator name, for example, as well as their email. Another field we want to create for our illustrators are the initials field right here. So we click on initials field and click right here. So every time there's a new section that they need to initial or sign off on, we will create an initials field right here. Another type of blue field that they will need to be able to fill in is their signature. So we scroll all the way down and we add the signature field by clicking on signature and add that right here. So that way they can sign it later on. Right here, we can add another text field so they can add their name and a date field. Click on date field so we can add that right here. So that's the second type of field, right? So we have the ones that are predetermined, that won't be editable for this particular document, and we have the blue blanks that are fillable by the illustrator. And now we need to create another field for us, the author, because once the illustrator has signed this agreement, it will automatically be sent to us so that we can then sign it as well. Okay, so what we will want to do is create another signature field. And for that, we will click on signature field again and add it right here. But as you can see right now, it's under the same signer, which is signer 1. So we will want to go over here to this field and we will want to click on add new signer. And that's now signer 2. You can change the name or you can simply leave it blank like this and click on OK. And now the color has changed. Now this signer will have everything in green. So here again, I need to add a field so we can print our name. So click on text field and it adds a green text field. And on the date, I click on date and it adds a green date. Okay, so now the green will be filled by us. So once we are done, once we have filled out all these fields, we are ready to save it. So go ahead and click on done and the document is saved. So the next thing we will be able to do now is send it. And the way we do this is click on send for signing. So go ahead and click on send for signing. And now we have a couple of options. I always like to click on set signing order. So I click on set signing order. And here the first signer will be the illustrator. So I put in the email address of the illustrator. And then signer 2 will be me, the author. And I will put my own email right here. And what this will do is once the illustrator has signed it, DigiSigner will automatically send it to me so I can sign it as well. And once both of us have signed it, a copy will be sent to the illustrator as well as myself to our inbox. So we both have a signed copy. Here you can also change the text if you would like the subject line and the message. And then you can click on send document, or you can also click on create document link. So go ahead and do that. And now DigiSigner has created links for us that we can share with our illustrator. These are just sample emails. So the first one is for the illustrator. The second one is for me, the author. So I will go ahead and copy the first link right here. And then that will be the link we can share with our illustrator. Or again, we can simply click on send as well. And so right now you can see it has been sent to the illustrator. And then later on, it will be sent to me automatically. And that is how you use DigiSigner. And once both the illustrator as well as the author have signed it, again, we get a copy automatically. So using an electronic signature service can be really helpful. And once both parties have signed the agreement, we are ready to get started and we can send our illustrator brief we have prepared to our hired illustrator. Having our beautiful story illustrated is such an exciting moment. In fact, so many of us are so excited that we often forget this very important step that is meant to protect both us authors as well as our illustrators. So I hope that with this video, you now know how important such an agreement is and how to put such an agreement together, and what elements we want to make sure to include in our agreement. Please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't yet. It really encourages me to keep making free videos for you just like this one. Here's to your very own Illustrator agreement. Bye!